are back with another video. This time we want to talk about the evolution of one of the greatest kingdoms in the history of humanity, told probably the longest era of all the times.
Today we are going to show you how was the evolution of England society in the Middle Age. Let's explore the economic and social structure and how the religion influenced the development of this great kingdom. Let's begin.
An English cultural identity first emerged from the interaction of the Germanic immigrants of the 5th and the 6th centuries and the indigenous Romano-British inhabitants. Also, early medieval chronicles describe the immigrants as English and Saxons. They came from a much wider area across the northern Europe and represented a range of different ethnic groups. Over the 6th century, however, these different groups began to coalesce in stratified societies across England, broadly corresponding to the later Anglo and Saxon kingdoms, recorded by Bede in the 8th century. By the 9th century, the term Anglican was being officially used to refer to a single English people, and promoted for propaganda purposes by chronicles and kings to inspire resistance for the Danish invasion.
During the 12th and 13th centuries, the English began to consider themselves superior to the Welsh, Scots, and Bretons. The English perceived themselves as civilized, economically prosperous, and properly Christian, while the Celtic French was considered lazy, barbarous, and bad war. Following the invasion of Ireland in the late 12th century, similar feelings were expressed about the Irish, with the distinctions clarified and reinforced in 14th century English legislation. The English also feel strongly about the foreign traders who lived in the special enclaves in London in the late Middle Age.
At the start of the Middle Ages, England was a part of Britannia, a former province of the Roman Empire. The English economy had once been dominated by Imperial Roman spending on a large military establishment, which in turn helped to support a complex network of towns, roads, and villages. At the end of the 4th century, however, Roman forces had been largely withdrawn, and the English economy collapsed. Germanic immigrants began to arrive in increasing numbers during the 5th century, initially peaceful, establishing small farms and settlements.
New political and social identities emerged, including an England culture in the east of England and Saxon culture in the south, with local groups established in regions, small polities ruled over by powerful families and individuals. By the 7th century, some rulers, including those of Wessex, East Anglia, Essex, and Kent, had begun to turn themselves kin, living in village regals, royal centers, and collecting tribute from the surrounding regions. These kingdoms are often referred to as the Heptarchy.
The Anglo-Saxon kingdom were hierarchical societies, each based on ties of allegiance between powerful lords and their immediate followers. At the top of the social structure was the king, who stood above many of the normal processes of Anglo-Saxon life and whose household had a special privilege and protection. Beneath the king were things, nobles, the more powerful of which maintained their own courts and were termed ealdormen. The relationship between kings and their nobles was bound up with military symbolisms and the ritual exchange of weapons and armor. Free men, called Charles, formed the next level of society, often holding land in their own right or controlling business in their towns. Gibbons, peasants who worked land belonging to a king, formed a lower class still. The very lowest class were slaves, who could be bought and sold and who held only minimal rights.
Within 20 years of the Norman conquest, the four Anglo-Saxon elites were replaced with a new class of Norman nobility, with around 8,000 Normans and French settled in England. The new era's successors of the Ealdormen, sheriffs and church seniors were all drawn from their ranks. In many areas of society there was continuity, as the Normans adopted many of the Anglo-Saxon governmental institutions, including the tax system, means and decentralization of law-making, and some judicial matters. Initially, sheriffs and the hundred courts continued to function as before.
Changes in other areas soon began to be felt. The method of government after the conquest can be described as a feudal system, in that the new nobles held their lands on behalf of the king in return for promising to provide military support and taking an oath of allegiance calling homage. They were granted lands termed a field of honor. At the center of power, the king employed a succession of clergy as chancellor, responsible for running the royal chancery, while the familiar regents, the military household, emerged to act as a bodyguard and military staff. England's bishops continued to form an important part in local administration alongside the nobility.